UK or call 01733 496 584.
salamradio.co.uk.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening. You're listening to Property Wise Show with myself, Shaz Nawaz. Unfortunately, Kieran isn't here today, although it's not unfortunate per se. He's out with his partner because it's her birthday, so they're in Cambridge. And I had the privilege of inviting Faisal, who's a station director or a director of the station, and has been for
one of the directors,
a few directors, and he's been with the station from inception, I believe. And we've obviously worked together previously when I was doing the Empower Hour show, and he kindly, he felt sorry for me, really, which is the truth, by the way, and said, Shaz, you talking to yourself for an hour, okay, you're just going to go off on a tangent and talk about all kinds of stuff and go down a rabbit hole, so I'll keep you structured and I'll keep you on path. I'll join you, which is very kind of him. And while Faisal's here, we'd love for you to interact with us. So if you want to call us, the number is 01733 602 133. You can text us on 07411 191062. We're on social media, so feel free to comment or ask a question via Facebook, YouTube, Twitter or Twitch. So plenty of opportunities there. So Faisal, while I've got you here, even though you're obviously more than welcome to ask me questions, what's your general view on property investing and the buy-to-let market?
In terms of for certain individual investors, I think it's a good opportunity. The other option I think is a good opportunity also is investing in companies, public listed companies. But in terms of buy-to-let property, I think it's better in a way in that you can potentially refinance property, you can expand your portfolio. But then the negatives of it are there's maintenance. You've got to somehow either outsource that, get that managed. So I don't think it's completely hands-off investment. So yeah, positives and negatives.
There are people out there, by the way, who might say, for example, buy-to-let's unfair because it locks out other people who can't afford to buy a property, and property shouldn't be a mechanism that one should use to gain wealth, even though if you speak to most property investors, and I talk to a lot of them, by the way, and I've done for many, many years up and down the country, they don't quite see it that way, but it's people who accumulate wealth and stop others getting on the property ladder. Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally agree with that entirely. I suppose it depends on supply and demand. So, for example, you have a limited supply of property, and if a small number of individuals are able to acquire those, it leaves possibly people who actually need the property, to actually purchase it and to live in. So in terms of the issue I have is if property is left, especially residential property, is left empty. So if people are investing purely to store their wealth, they're not interested in actually housing people. That's the line that for me I couldn't cross. However, in terms of making property available for people to rent, I don't think that's an issue, because some people don't necessarily want to purchase a property. They might want to live somewhere temporarily.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And in fact, people ask me quite often, by the way, but I'll address one other point that you made, which is very smart, by the way, and very appropriate. So in Peterborough, I think we have, at one point when I asked this question, we had about 350 empty homes. 350, I think, is a big number, by the way.
I think it's a lot more than that currently.
But that's the number I was given.
Okay.
So we looked at different things we could do, and one was to increase the council tax significantly if your property is empty, which encourages people then to say, okay, I better rent the property out. Now, I mean, people have different reasons for why a property's been empty. Maybe their parents or so, or loved one passed away, so it's in probate. Maybe they've moved out elsewhere, and there's various reasons. So it isn't all to do with property holding, but I think more and more councils now are taking a view that they should charge higher council tax to those individuals. I'm talking about 300%, 400%, 500% increase possibly to get them to back into use, which is good. But I think generally speaking, most people buy property to obviously try and make some use of it and get some rental income. But they're not really business people. They're not really looking to make money, because a lot of, and I've covered this previously with Kieran on the show, and he and I have a very similar view on this, is that if you've got property and you've invested in it, then you should look for a return on investment, which is cash flow, some kind of profit. Yet if you speak to most individuals, so you've got about probably over 5 million landlords here. Most of them are accidental landlords, which again we've covered. So this is, you have a house, you move out, your first one you either refinance to fund a deposit for the second house, or you keep it and rent it out. So you become a landlord. Never in your mind did you ever have a view or a thought or an idea or a plan to become a landlord. You ended up with one property. You might move again in 5 years' time. Now you keep the second property. So you've got two properties. A lot of people out there become landlords because by chance, by accident, hence why it's accidental landlords.
Or they're doing it on the side. It's not really something that they're actually actively creating a business plan. This is where I want to get to.
That's right.
So
they're not, which is a good point again you make on business plans, which we cover. But generally speaking, you're here, so you can pick my brains. Do you have any questions for me or on the world of property that you want me to share with you and our audience tonight?
I think it would be good to know how, let's say, for example, if somebody wanted to become a property investor, as in let's say they're doing it part-time, they're running a business currently. I mean, I think you've probably gone through this process already. What's the process of scaling it up? So, for example, let's say if somebody's got 2 or 3 buy-to-let properties and they want to get to 10, for example, what would be the steps that they should take?
Okay, I always share a disclaimer at the start of the show, and I'll do that now. I am not qualified or registered to offer financial advice. I also don't share an opinion on interest. I have a particular opinion, but I don't share that. Because obviously this is an Islamic or a Muslim radio station, and the clear view of in Islam is interest is prohibited. So at no point do I go out and proactively promote interest, but that's part of the system. But I'll talk about interest, but I'm not endorsing it. By the way, people need to do what they're comfortable with. But to answer your question, I think everybody works at a different pace. And something that I've learned over being in business for over 20 years is that one size doesn't fit all. So I may have a particular perspective on how to scale up. You'll have a very different view to somebody who'll have a different view. And this links back to a very good point you make about a business plan, is most people don't have a plan. They just get through life, stumbling and mumbling through, and I mean that with respect, by the way, without having any foresight of what am I doing in the first 12 months or now the next 12 months, what's happening in the next 2 to 3 years, 2 to 5 years, 5 years and beyond. And yet when I kind of quiz most people on their exit plan, they haven't thought about it. And yet the people who are doing well, who are focused, will be very eloquent and very clear in their vision of where they are, where they're trying to get to, where they actually want to get to, and how they're going to exit their business.
Yeah.
So I think that requires a lot of heavy lifting and thought, and it comes over time because your priorities changed.
Yeah.
How I saw the world of business 20 years ago, when I was single, and how I see it today, being married and having 4 children, is very different. And as you get older, you kind of become conservative with the small C, so you don't like change. You just want to preserve what you've got and kind of become comfortable with that. But to answer your question, it depends. The quickest way that I know, by far the quickest way, and is to buy a commercial property.
Yeah.
Then you've got 2 options. You can either use something called permitted development, which gives you, as long as that property has a particular class use, you write to the council, and they can't refuse you planning.
Yeah.
So you ask them for permission. There are certain things like looking at the environment, and ensuring you got enough sufficient car parking space, all that kind of stuff. But because it's permitted, you'll get planning to change use from commercial or business use to residential.
Okay.
If that's not available, by the way, then what you can do is absolutely apply for planning. Okay. Now, you might or might not get through planning. Planning is slow, arduous, and it can take time. I don't want to quote the average planning time, but the average planning time for me, is about 12 months.
Yeah, is that specific to Peterborough? Is that generally on average it takes?
I've done it in 4 or 5 different councils now.
Okay.
And they all pretty much take the same amount of time.
Okay.
But if you buy a commercial property, whether you're applying for planning or whether you're going to use permitted development, I mean, PD is going to speed things up, by the way.
Yeah.
But then you can buy a property, and the simplest way of doing it, because I mean we've got a question from Imtiaz, which I'll respond to in a second, and I'll obviously welcome your thoughts. And it's good to hear from Imtiaz, of course, as always. That people say, well, I'm going to buy a commercial property for £500,000, for example. Okay, I need to get a mortgage. And let's just assume for 1 minute that they're comfortable with a mortgage and interest. And they say, I need to put down a deposit, but I haven't got that money. And that's where people usually stop. So let's say you're buying a commercial property for £500,000, like I've said, and you need to put down a 25% deposit, you need £125,000.
Yeah.
Where do you get it from? And this, by the way, links me back to something that I learned when I was doing a master's in Islamic finance. Is in Islam, what you have is when you have 2 people coming together. Okay, one person is the investor. Yeah, he gives you the money, which is called Rabbul Mal. So he gives you the finance. The other person has the expertise. Yeah. So his contribution is what we call in the Western world sweat equity. He puts the effort in, and they both get together and do an investment, and that works phenomenally well, Faisal, in property. Yeah. So for example, I come to you and say to you, I've got this particular development. Yeah. We're going to work on this. Okay. I need to £125,000. You or a group of people say, we've got the funds, we'll fund it. But your job, Shaz, is to manage it, whether we need planning or not, and to convert it into flats, and then give us the finished article, and then we'll divvy up based on whatever we agree. Let's just assume for now 50-50. That gets me on the property ladder. Gets you a safe investment, as safe as obviously property can be, and an income stream, and off you go. You can do it. Okay. And that in the world of property, by the way, Faisal, is called no money down. Like that, you can scale up very, very, very quickly. I mean, I've seen people start from 0, get to 25, 50, 75, 100 plus properties in the space of 5 years.
Yeah. Is it possible to do something similar but leave the property as commercial property so it stays as business use, or is that something that works in a different way?
You can, but it depends on what the investor wants. So if you're looking for a particular rate of return, then you'd obviously work out what residential property gets you, what commercial property gets you, and compare. If you're just looking for an investment and you think, don't really want to take too much risk, for example, there's more red tape or bureaucracy, which, for want of a better expression, that people don't want to be part of. Well, commercial property gets rid of that to some extent, because if you rent your property to me and you've got a full repairing and insuring lease, which means I basically take charge of all the property and the internals. So I pay for the repairs, maintenance, insurance and all the other costs, which is more hands off. You get your rent every single month.
Yeah.
Some people might be comfortable with that. Others might be comfortable with saying, well, we want residential property because the returns might be better, or that they just want to diversify.
Yeah.
In which case, then they've got two options. They either use a property agent, or they might manage the property themselves. But commercial property, I think, generally speaking, works really well. Your returns are anywhere from 5% up to 15% a year.
Okay.
15%, you've got to look for them, by the way. There are deals out there, but 10, 12%, I see them all the time.
Yeah.
So
Is that retail or is that industrial type commercial?
industrial can be even more. So if you've got industrial units, especially warehousing,
Yeah.
they are like gold dust. A huge demand right now, and has been for the last 3 or 4 years. Can't get hold of any. So if you keep somebody can build them
Yeah.
or get access to them, I think they're going to do exceptionally well. So we've got a couple of comments, one from Imtiaz and one from Alex, and thank you, Alex. Nice to hear from you. And Alex always likes to ask me questions about my role as Labour leader. So even though I'm not here as Labour leader, I'll happily answer his question, by the way. Imtiaz says, accidentally owning a rental property is one thing. Actively scaling up your holding of properties no longer makes you an accidental landlord. That's fine, but the point I was making, Imtiaz, there was people start off with the example that I shared with you, where you buy a house,
Yeah.
then to live in, then you rent, and then you move to a bigger house, and you end up keeping that, and then you might do that a second time until you moved into your third home. So you've got two properties, and you're kind of an accidental landlord. So because you just by accident become a landlord. Now, if that person then decides to scale up, because that was the next question that you asked, then they've now made a decision to become a property investor. But a lot of people out there are accidental landlords because they have 1, 2, possibly 3 properties. And when you ask them the situation, pretty much more often than not, it's the fact that they have actually moved into a bigger or a smaller home. They've upscaled or downsized, and therefore they've kept the properties. But once they're obviously making a conscious choice to actually become a property investor, then they're not accidental anymore, because then they become a property investor, and therefore they should treat it as a business. Now, there's a whole different argument or a conversation, by the way, is are most property investors business owners, or are they just having a secondary income or passive income, like you said? I think if you speak to most of them, they would probably just be passive property investors. A smaller number are actively seeing themselves as business owners. Then we have a comment from Alex Blower, who's also a host on one of the shows, and he says, certainly holds very different moral and social implications to know. Personally, I would like to ask Shaz where he stands as Labour leader, advising how to extract people's produce of their labour, essentially to avoid labour. I mean, that's why it's called a passive income, isn't it? So I guess it depends really. And I think sometimes people conflate issues, by the way, and I've had this a lot. So people trying to box you into one particular place. So let's say, especially you're a conservative, therefore you must believe in low taxation.
Yeah,
you must.
I know what you're saying.
You must believe in the free market system. You must believe workers must have no rights. And I think it's fair to say I've met lots of conservatives and talked to them all the time. And if I was to box them all in that particular box, it wouldn't work. The same with Labour, and we say this loud and proud, by the way, we're a broad church. Okay, so you'll have lots of people who actually see themselves on the left.
Yeah.
Some people might call them, for example, and I'm not putting labels on anybody, by the way, they might call them communists, they might call them Marxists, might call them socialists. Some others might be closer to the left of centre, but we all think alike. So there's a particular view that Alex is sharing, and I think sometimes Alex might think everybody should share that view. I'm not saying he does think that. I'm just saying I think he may think that, and that's not how the world works, by the way. So my particular view has always been, and I'm on record for this on the council, and I've led on this, that everybody who wants to own a home, like you said, should have the opportunity. And it's the onus on the state and the government to make that possible for people to get on the property ladder. There are those, like you said, who shouldn't own property. And it was a conversation I was going to have with you a bit later on, that there are lots of people I speak to out there who say it's not worth owning a home because I look up so much of my equity. So if you speak to most people and say, where's your wealth, if you can use that word, they would say to you, my wealth is in the home that I own. Because most people don't own a business. They work.
Yeah, I know some business owners who actually don't own their own home.
Absolutely.
They'll pay, some people might say that's a ridiculous amount of rent, but they choose to do that instead of buying, spending however much on a property. Because they also move places as well. They're not necessarily going to stick to one city based on their business or their own personal desires. They decide to move countries occasionally. So in those cases, they find it better to rent and then use that money in their business instead of
absolutely, because
property.
they'll work out the maths and say, I've got, let's say somebody's got a house that they own or a home which is worth, let's say, £500,000. And let's just assume they've paid off some of the mortgage over the years and they've got £250,000 mortgage outstanding. So they've got 250 grand equity. And thinking, well, what's that earning me? Nothing, because it's stuck in the property.
Yeah.
And I'm paying a monthly payment called a mortgage payment for the 250 that's outstanding. If I sell that on the 250 that I have, what kind of a return can I get? 10%, 25,000, 15%, £37,500. Can that now afford to pay for my home or some of my home? So I'll get a house for £1,000 or £1,500 a month, use the rest of the cash, invest it, and have an additional gain. So it depends on people's personal perspective. And I think Alex and I, to be fair to say, would agree to disagree on this point here, because I think those people who are building houses are doing something that the state should be doing. The state should be building more homes.
That's right.
And making it easier for people to get on the property ladder. The state doesn't want to interfere. I think that's a big mistake. I've always made that point, and I've always made the point that in Peterborough at least, the council should work towards having a housing revenue account, which gets the council back to building its own homes. So we've got people who are living in temporary accommodation, or those who are sleeping rough, if they want a property, which I believe most of them would do as long as it's right for them, then it's the job of the council to supply it. If it doesn't, then we're paying for that anyway by using temporary accommodation, and the costs far outweigh what it would do to build homes over the long term. And in terms of labour, I think people call it passive income. It never really is passive.
No, I was going to say
it requires a lot of effort and time. I think we've got the phone ringing. I'm hoping that's Alex, by the way, because I think we'll have a good conversation. So can we grab that?
Yeah, you can answer that if you click on where it says air.
Here?
Just
Here?
Yeah. And then put that fader up. The phone
This
fader,
one here?
Phone one. Green.
There we go. That's good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Who's speaking?
This is Imtiaz. Imtiaz.
I thought I'd recognize the voice, but I thought I'd ask who's calling. But I am Taz. Nice of you to join us.
Thank you. Listen, it's a really interesting show, and obviously very interested in the show off the back of the show we did yesterday on a well, not on a similar issue. I think we were arguing for something completely different, but I just wanted to share like a quick rundown, if you'd allow me for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely, go for it.
So, you know how we talked about like interest and no interest and whether or not interest is halal, haram, and obviously you don't encourage people to take interest. But buy-to-lets, assuming it's a cash property, no interest involved. Let's say the property is worth like £200,000, right? That's pretty much the price of a rental property nowadays. You might be getting like £10,000 to £11,000 of rent at £900 a month. That's like £10,800 a year. Allow for the fact that there might be periods where it's empty, so take off 5%. Then you got repairs, replacements. You take off like £1,500 a year. Then you take off the management fee, which is about 8-9%. And then you take off tax, because this is additional income, right? So take off tax at 30% of what you get. You're left with, on £200,000 investment, you're left with £5,600, which is about 2.8%. And what I'd argue is, in the absence of a buy-to-let mortgage, would it not be better to just put in £200,000, if you have that kind of equity, into a FTSE tracker and just get dividends? And you can hold that in an ISA. It'll be tax-free, and you'll be earning £10,000 and not exploiting people who could potentially buy houses, instead of getting your £5,600 and having all the hassle of managing a property at the same time. So what are your thoughts on something like that, for example? I know that's not your show, but do you see the challenge?
See, thank you for that observation, Imtiaz. And I think you and I have had similar conversations every time we meet, by the way. And I was totally fascinated. In fact, by the way, as we were driving here, when we mentioned your name, just simply in terms of some of the interesting and varied conversations we have. So people always, and you'll appreciate this, talk about diversifying. And I'll always say to people, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So think about obviously putting your money into a few different places if you're looking for some kind of a return. So you use the word exploit. But I'm pretty certain I don't agree with that, because having worked with property investors intricately and intimately over the last 20 years, I would argue that I'm yet to find one individual who I've worked with personally, by the way, Imtiaz, who exploits people. That's not to say, by the way, there aren't bad landlords out there. There are people who don't do what they're supposed to do, don't follow the rule of the law, and potentially exploit people and exploit or break the rules. But I think generally speaking, most people who invest money in an asset, be it property or elsewhere, want to do the right thing for everybody involved, because it's in their best interest if they've got a tenant to look after them, because nobody wants a new tenant coming in every, say, 3 or 6 months, because number one, the neighbours will probably start complaining and saying, hold on a moment, we've got somebody new coming here, we don't know who lives in the neighbourhood, we don't feel comfortable. But to answer your question, I guess it's a matter of perspective. If people are looking for a rate of return, then and they don't want to deal with interest, then they can do. But then there's the other argument, which I've had a lot with people, is saying, well, is investing in the stock market 100% halal either? In terms
you got ethical funds, haven't you? You can invest in ethical funds. Ways around that, and plus you can choose which company you invest in. I know you're going to go into a break soon, but just before I go, I will say you weren't sure about Faisal, but he's definitely a conservative.
Is he? I thought he was part of the Green Party, but this is new news to me. So in the second half, I think I might break some of the rules and talk about politics, which will get me to big trouble by the way. And I won't have a show next week, but now that you've mentioned it, we're about to go to a break. So thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, my friend, and we'll catch up soon. Right. Take care. We're going to a break. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Isha Azan.
Reach out for you to hold my hand. The rain may fall, but united we stand. Our prophet guided the children, they grew into be men. He taught the brothers be equal and respect your friend. The strength in our hearts could never be rivaled. Broken walls could be built up again. And if you believe, the angels will guide you. Together it will give you strength. Heart of a Muslim, proud to be part of Islam. United we will always stand. Heart of Life can be hard, I know, but all you need is faith. My soul, my passion of 1,000 men. We speak truth, our fathers will always be there. The strength in our hearts could never be rivaled. Broken walls could be built up again. And if you believe, the angels will guide you. Together it will give you strength. Heart of a Muslim, proud to be part of Islam. Heart of a Muslim, united we will always stand. Heart of a Muslim, I'm proud to be part of Islam.
With you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This is Salam Radio.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to part 2. Well, part 1 was very interesting, and thank you very much for Imtiaz, obviously, for calling in and also sharing his views on the live stream. And obviously thank you also, Alex, for sharing your views. By the way, Alex, would welcome you calling in or maybe coming into one of the shows. By the way, I think we'll have a very interesting conversation. We'll probably have a different perception, but I think it'll be a lively conversation here. You're more than welcome to come on the Property Wire show whenever you like, by the way. And if anybody else wants to call in, you're more than welcome. The number is 01733 602 133, and we appreciate all done different views, by the way, because I think that ends up with a good conversation, a lively discussion. Some may call it a debate. I will see it as a conversation and a discussion, and that improves things, doesn't it, Faisal? What's your view?
That's the whole purpose of the radio. I mean, the purpose we set up this platform was for us as a community. I'm talking about the entire community of Peterborough, not just Muslims, to have that conversation, have that dialogue. And there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. I mean, disagreeing is a good thing. It's how we deal with that disagreement. Are we going to have a fight over it and not talk to each other? Or are we going to continue discussing with an open mind from both sides and come to, either changing our views, or even if you stick with your views, it's about improving yourself and improving society. Because sometimes we might discuss something between me and you and Shaz, and we might agree on certain things. Other things we might disagree. Certain things I'll agree with Imtiaz on, what he's saying in terms of investing in the stock market. Maybe if it's certain types of companies that you don't want to invest in, you can invest in companies that align with your values. And same thing with being, I guess, if you're owning property. I mean, you could be one type of person that will exploit people in quotes, or the other type of person you could be is where you're not so much interested in the how much profit you can extract from it. It's more about, let's say, for example, you've got a tenant who's been living there for 20 years. You might not want to increase the rent because you're happy with that payment. So yes. I don't think it's every landlord. I don't think they're all like that. And I've personally experienced people like this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. People want longevity, and generally speaking, as a race, most people don't really like change in different guises, by the way. So you're right. If they've got the same tenant in there, then they'd rather keep them rather than have somebody else. And Imtiaz makes a good point, and so did you, by the way, in terms of rate of return, or and where better, or how can you better utilize your funds. Unfortunately, having been an accountant and worked with businesses over the last 23 years, most people don't think like that. So some people might think about risk. Some people might just think about having no risk. So the old saying, safe as house, you think, housing is a safe investment, or the friends around me. Because generally speaking, and I'm not saying this is going to be true for everybody, generally speaking, I think people maybe think that you have to be a bit more sophisticated to invest in the property market, in the stock market, because you need to know how financial instruments work, which isn't true, by the way, because you've got obviously advisors. I think that's the general perception out there. Whereas most people, not everybody, but most people tend to understand houses because they either buy one, or their parents have bought one, or the people around them usually may have one or two properties, so they feel more comfortable with it. But if you were asking the long and hard questions, then I'd very much endorse what Imtiaz said, as in the best rate of return is not in property. I can say that for sure, by the way. But it depends on your attitude towards risk. Somebody else who's been very kind to comment is Brother Muhammad Mansha, who I haven't heard from a while. Brother Mansha, I hope you are really well. He and I and Imtiaz used to have some really good conversations, by the way. So when I'm in their company, they do talk on a very high intellectual level. And his comment is that the housing market is not a free market when it comes to building new houses, and it's heavily regulated to protect green spaces. And obviously you've got the planning process, so he's absolutely right. And sometimes he's saying it's there to protect landlords, but there is no restriction on buying more properties than one needs. Buy-to-let is one of the primary factors of housing purchasing being unaffordable.
I kind of agree with that.
So do I.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it depends. In fact, let's say your views first. On that.
I think. I'm not saying that I'm against people owning multiple properties. If there was enough, if the state provided enough for the basic needs of individuals. So, for example, some people, they have tax credits or benefits or whatever it is that they need to live. In the same way, property, there should be a minimum amount given to families so they can actually either live in a home which is provided by the local council or government or whoever. But I don't think there should be any restriction on individuals buying property. That's my personal, you could say,
take on it,
ideological view or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, obviously, thank you to Brother Mansha for interacting and participating. It's obviously good to hear his views.
Yeah.
And this is a view that I hear quite often, by the way. And I guess, and Brother Mansha has a valid point, by the way. And sometimes, and I'm not saying Brother Mansha is doing this, by the way, but sometimes I think we try to find a simple solution to a complex problem. And complex problems sometimes may have simple solutions. Sometimes they have more complicated solutions, and it's more than one thing, by the way. So I think if we were to restrict all landlords from buying properties, does that mean everybody else will be able to buy property? I don't know. Does that mean there'll be less demand? Obviously, because you've stopped people buying. Where does that leave the housing market? I haven't done the numbers, so I can't project that for you. I think if there's obviously less demand, then the prices will come down. But I'm always a fan of, rather than pushing things down, okay, or I think we should pull things up.
Yeah.
And say, how do we create a bigger and better opportunity? So before I came on the show, we had a meeting at the council, and we had quite a few different leaders from different areas, and also experienced local politicians. And the last point that I made there was about how do we take Peterborough to the next stage, and how do we improve it. And what I said was, we need to be thinking about three things: high skill, high skills, high wage, high opportunity. That's what needs to happen in Peterborough. And I think if we do that, that then should enable more people to be able to afford their own homes. Then there's those who you've mentioned who are on universal basic income, or who can't work. Then the state clearly needs to make sure that we can provide them with suitable properties. That is our responsibility. Let's not make any qualms or mistake about that. But those who are working, or who are young and who've gone to university or haven't gone to university and can't afford to buy a home, then we need to create an environment where they can get on the property ladder should they choose to do so. Because right now, and this is an issue for me as much as it's for anybody else, I think about how are my 4 children going to be able to get on the property ladder, and without making any secrets about it, but at the same time without bragging about it, they'll have the support from the family, and I think they'll be okay. Now, not everybody's in that fortunate position where they have, let's say, a family network or support. So we need to create an opportunity where everybody who wants to buy a house should be able to buy a house. So I think, although Brother Mansha makes a good point, I don't know how much that will actually create in terms of being in any financial environment for people to buy more property. It might bring the price down, but how much does the price need to come down first? When somebody's, let's say, earning £30,000 a year
Yeah, it does.
to buy a house.
The rate at which properties have gone up is ridiculous. I remember my dad telling me once on how much he purchased his first property, and then I asked him how much. He said, we only earned whatever it was, £7 a week or something.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
if you did the maths in terms of the ratio, it was completely different to what it is now in terms of what you're earning.
Absolutely. So we bought our first house well before I was born, by the way, on Cromwell Road, which is the house I was born in and lived most of my life, and not too far away from him because he was on Gladstone Street, for £1,000. And that house now is probably worth, I mean, I've not had it valued, so I'm taking a guess, but let's just use the number I think Imtiaz used as an example, or you may have used £200,000. Probably worth £200,000 over the last 45, 50 years.
Yeah.
A colossal increase, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And have salaries gone up at the same ratio? I don't think so. And it is a huge challenge. So I think we need to create an environment where, okay, one could argue that we try and cap property prices. I think we need to create a better environment where people get paid more money.
Yeah,
okay?
I agree with that.
And that they can afford to make those choices, whether they want to buy a property or not. We have Master Shabaz Aslam, who's a wonderful young man, by the way, I've known for a very long time. And he says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Master Shabaz Aslam, very nice to hear from you. I hope your family is well, especially my friend Shazad Aslam, who's your older brother and your dad. And if you have any questions or thoughts, by the way, feel free to share your observations. Anything else that you want to share or ask, Faisal? Because obviously you're the man of the moment today.
No, I think I can't think of any other questions specifically related to buy-to-let properties. But in terms of other types of properties other than residential, do you have experience in investing in that?
So my kind of the main things that I do are either buying buy-to-let. And when I say buy-to-let, I mean I usually buy commercial property, or I'll buy land, which usually has planning. Once or twice I've gone down the planning process and then build the homes, and I'll either rent them out or sell them. But we have clients up in the other country who pretty much go through many different property strategies. And I think Kieran mentioned last week or the week before, because he's got quite a long list. I think he's got 16 or 21 strategies that he wants to go through. We've been through 6. Yeah. So there's quite a few different. So you've got single lets, you've got HMOs, which I make no secret about. I'm not a fan of at all, and I don't have any HMOs. I never have done, and I don't think I ever will. Then you've got what I've mentioned earlier to you, commercial conversions, where you buy commercial property, convert it into residential, and it's becoming more and more popular now in even the town centre, where the council usually wants you to keep the ground floor retail or commercial, and the uppers get converted into residential. You've then got furnished holiday lets, usually where you have a lot of tourists. For us, it would be Blackpool, Cumbria, Devon, Cornwall, those type of places. And linked with that, you've got serviced accommodation, where people buy a property and then rent it by the night. So it's like a bed and breakfast, but it might not offer all the services of a bed and breakfast. You then have rent to rent. So you're saying, I'm fed up of renting my own property. I don't really want to use agents because I don't like working with them, or I've had a bad experience. I don't have the time to manage the property myself. I'd quite like somebody else to manage it for me. So you rent to just give it to somebody else, and they'll give you like a 5-year lease and manage the property for you. So you've got that option. You've then got deal sourcing. So you become somewhat of an agent. So you find properties for people. So you come to me and say, Shaz, I want to buy a property. This is what I'm looking for. This is my budget in this particular area. Yeah. If you're a bit more sophisticated, you might be looking at rate of return. You might be looking at adding value to the property and those type of things. And then I'll go and try and find a property for you in your budget. Now, of course, you can go to a high street agent or an online agent to do that, or you can go to auction. Most people don't have the time, so they'd rather go to a trusted source. So there's quite a few, and there's many others, by the way. Yeah. So there's real estate investment trusts and many other things that one could do. But the ones that I've shared with you are kind of the basic ones that most people look at. Yeah. So Shabaz Aslam has kindly asked a question, so thank you, Shabaz. He's saying people are really finding it hard and struggling with everyday needs. He's absolutely right. They are. because at the minute, obviously, with the cost of living crisis and inflation and everything else that's going on, people are struggling.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a different conversation to the one that we're talking about, and how we could possibly look to fix that. But because that's outside the remit, I totally agree with you, Shabazz, that people are struggling, and that more needs to be done a lot quickly, or a lot quicker, by the way, than is being done by the government to support that. And this is not my personal approach, by the way, being partisan to a particular party. I think whichever government it was, I'd say the government needs to step in and support people, because a lot of people are struggling.
Yeah.
And I think over the next 2 years, it's going to be hard, and it's been hard so far. It's going to get even harder. But thank you for sharing that particular observation. So
I've got a question. You mentioned real estate investment trusts. How do they work?
So these are, so it's less, so you got, let's think about the stock market as such. So you can either buy a stock directly in Virgin, if it's listed, Coca-Cola, if it's listed. These companies are listed, by the way, okay? Well, Coca-Cola is. And so any company listed on the stock exchange, you can buy their shares. Or like, I think Imtiaz may have alluded to it, you can buy a tracker or a fund, which has more than one stock. So here you can either have your own trust, which is complex and costs a lot of money to set up, or you can invest with somebody who has a trust which is diversified. So here they've got different types of property into that trust, and you invest, and then they give you a certain rate of return, which helps you to diversify the risk. So you might not want all your property to come from buy-to-let, or from commercial property, or from rent-to-rent, or from HMOs or single lets. So you diversify the portfolio, so that when the market changes, you're not fully affected by any downturn. It is mainly to protect the downturn or the downside, but at the same time, obviously, when things are going up, not all of your things will go up or increase at the same scale or size. So that's something that people can think about. But that usually is for people who tend to be a bit more sophisticated, as opposed to the general investor who might just either buy property or become an accidental landlord.
Okay.
So that's something. And I think Kieran's got that on his list of different property strategies. So,
I mean, that seems like when you say hands-off investment, to me that seems like that's completely hands-off. Whereas if you've got property, even though if you're dealing with a management company, there's always still something that you've probably got to get involved with.
Unless you're, as we said earlier, Dale said, if you're investing in the stock market, that's pretty hands-off, because you're putting your trust into somebody else. But other than that, most of the investments, especially property, like you said, the boiler's broken down, you're going to fix it. The tap's not working. Okay, the door handle is broken. There is always something. Yes, you may have an agent, and he may charge you for that privilege, or you may have a handy person or somebody who can go and fix it. But more often than not, people you will usually try and go and fix the problem themselves, because you ring somebody, and it depends obviously how much you know about fixing things. But if somebody says to you, my boiler is broken, and you've got some experience of fixing boilers, and you ring a plumber and says to you, I can't come out for 3 days, and you obviously are COGI registered, you might do it yourself. Or you might be an electrician, and the electrics aren't working, you're going to do it yourself. Or someone says, my door handle is broken, can you come and replace it? If you know how to do it, you'll do it yourself, because calling somebody out will take 4 days, and you're conscious that you've got a tenant, and you don't want them to be inconvenienced for 4 days. So it's never 100% hands off. And I think anybody who sells the pipe dream, this is pure passive income. You can make money while you sleep. Well, I can tell you now, having been in property for 20 years, I've not met one single person, by the way, and I've interviewed people, I've spoken at loads of events, and I still do. We have a lot of property clients. I also do coaching and consulting, and then I'm at networking events. I've not met a single person in 20 years, Faisal, who says, I make money while I sleep. It's pure passive income. It always requires some effort and time. And it just depends how much time and effort people want to expend in it, by the way. So how did you end up becoming a landlord then, if you don't mind my asking?
For me, it was obviously I run a it's not my primary thing. You could say it's accidental in a way. Accidental as in I've got income generated from my main business and I need to invest it. So my dad says, instead of leaving it in the bank, you should invest it in property. And that's how it was pretty much. So I just set up a separate company and then use that money from the first business into property.
And for somebody, and it's kind of outside the remit of the property show, but because we've started the conversation, I think I'm hoping it'll be helpful for people. Looking back now, do you think, did you give enough thought to the rate of return or the return on investment or the return on capital employed, or do you just think this is what my dad is saying and obviously he's experienced and he's been through life more than I have and I'll just do what he's saying?
Yeah, I mean, I did work out the return on investment. But I didn't actually think, okay, is, for example, Peterborough the best place to invest or purchase property, or is it somewhere else? For me, you could say I was kind of brainwashed, is that you need to know where the property is, as in you got to see it, you got to keep an eye on it. Whereas I think if for somebody who's more experienced, they probably wouldn't care where it is as long as it meets their specific requirement, but it's and rate of return. But then also with the rate of return, you've got to consider is capital appreciation you're interested in. The area might not be so good, so there might be high maintenance costs. Obviously, you know more about this kind of stuff.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, again, this is one of the reasons when I ask people why they invest in property is that they state that exact reason. It's tangible. But if they make investments elsewhere, they might not be tangible, or they can't touch them, they can't see them, they can't feel them. So they're not too keen to do that. They'd rather invest in a house because it's bricks and mortar, it's physical, it is tangible, and that gives them, I guess, some peace of mind and comfort. So it's interesting how, like I said, people have a different view on things depending on how they see things.
Yeah, I mean, for me, going forward, if there were other small, entrepreneurs who were starting technology, software companies, for example, that's something that I would probably look at investing in, rather than property.
That's because you didn't tell me. Sorry, I think when I was asking you earlier question, I forgot to mention investing in commercial property, which again is a good opportunity, and it's something that people should explore. Again, I'd say if I was to talk about passive income, which I don't really do, that probably is the most passive when it comes to property, in my view, simply because if you have a lease in place, then you have a tenant who runs a business, pays you the rent, and they pay for the repairs and the insurance. If it's an FRI lease, or full repairing and insuring lease, and so that's probably the most passive. If there were to be anything passive in the world of property compared to everything else. So I didn't mention that earlier, but I think commercial property is definitely something that people should explore, look at. And it's good to have a diversified portfolio, even though I don't actually talk about investments. So other than property, would you look to invest elsewhere, or would you say you're pretty keen and happy with the world of property?
I think it's diversifying. Obviously, it makes sense. I mean, I have a ISA, so I use that allowance.
Yeah, you got that's £20,000 every single year that people can invest in. And again, I'm not endorsing or saying anything about ISAs or anything else, but from a pure kind of tax point of view, the government to incentivize those, or all the income or the interest, depending if you've got a cash ISA or a stocks ISA, stocks and shares, there's no income tax to pay. Then when you sell the ISA, there's no capital gains tax to pay. So the government do make it quite enticing, if that's the right word to use, to put money into an ISA. So if people are looking to invest some money that's reasonably safe and has tax benefits, then an ISA is a good way to go. And then obviously you can have a junior ISA for your children as well.
And I mean, that's fine for money that you've acquired through salary or dividends, but then you've got company profits which you want to invest. So that's where, most people, what they end up doing is either investing again in stocks and shares or investing in property. But some people have said to me commercial is less hassle than, I don't know how true that is.
No, it's right. It's right. As long as the biggest hassle, I guess, is to find a tenant and get a lease signed and agreed.
Yeah.
Once you've got that, unless that tenant goes bust or they fall into financial problems or something else where they can't pay the rent, generally speaking, they'll just stay there for as long as they can within the terms of a lease. And off you go, you're sorted. So I'll cover something else which you've mentioned. Again, I'm keen not to go down the road of financial advice because I'm not allowed to give financial advice. But I can talk about this to some extent purely from a tax point of view. So what some people do end up doing, and I hope our listeners who have a business will find this interesting or useful, is if you have a business vessel, you can make pension contributions.
Yeah, I do that, yeah.
So you can have a private pension, you can have a SIP, you can have a SAS, and generally speaking, if you were looking to buy property, then we can go down the road of SAS. So we're kind of coming to the last.
Yeah, I think with SAS it's purely commercial property.
Purely commercial,
yeah.
But it's a good opportunity, especially if the company is cash rich or you're looking to build a pension pot, because everybody wants to, I hope, or at least people I speak to, want to retire at some point. That seems to be getting longer and longer, by the way. I think I'll be working till I'm 88 or something if it comes to life by the time I get somewhere near there. But so if they can have some investment and return, then they can afford to retire early. So that's something that I will pick up on next week because our time's about to run out. But we've had a fantastic conversation today, by the way. So thank you, Faisal, for you coming in.
No, thank you.
Especially to Imtiaz, Alex,
Yeah.
Brother Mansha and Master Shabazz for joining in. It's been a brilliant conversation. I look forward to speaking to you and you joining us next week. Until then, take care, look after yourselves. Assalamu alaikum.
Stay tuned to Salam Radio after this short ad break.